Welcome to the Resilience Report, where each week we share the latest on companies engaging in inspirational solutions for our planet and engage with ecopreneurs and lighthouse leaders disrupting their respective industries in pursuit of better, more resilient business. I'm your host, Lauren Scott. Thank you for joining me as we dive into this week's report. If sustainability were to be a professional sport, and let's face it, sometimes it can certainly feel like it, our next guest would be a first-round draft pick. I'm so honored to be joined by Catherine Atkin, the co-founder and director of Carbon Accountable, whose expertise has been pivotal in advancing corporate transparency on greenhouse gas emissions. Catherine and her team played a leading role in shaping California's SB 253 Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act, a landmark piece that many of us in the sustainability space are very familiar with, of legislation with implications that extend far beyond the state's borders. Catherine is a climate attorney and entrepreneur working at the intersection of law, policy, and innovation to build systems that can accelerate global decarbonization and ensure equitable and sustainable development. She's a recognized leader in climate change and urban sustainability with deep expertise in national and subnational GHG accounting policies and implementation frameworks. Catherine received a BA from Stanford University, a law degree from UC Berkeley School of Law, and a master's degree in urban planning from the University of California, Los Angeles. In today's episode, we turn our focus on the critical topic of greenhouse gas reporting, a cornerstone of corporate accountability in the fight against climate change. What does it entail, and how does it balance the dynamics between voluntary action and mandatory compliance? We'll dive into all of that. Together, we'll also explore the importance of clarity and transparency in combating greenwashing, the role of policy in driving change, and what it means to lead with resilience in an increasingly complex global landscape. Catherine also shares her reflections on the sustainability journey, her experiences at the recent COP29, and the insights she's gained throughout her impactful career. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's dive into this important conversation. The longtime listeners of the Resilience Report know that much of what we focus on really is at the intersection of sustainability and business. And when we're doing this work, we often end up looking to California as this kind of guiding light as to best practices and what we can expect to come and impact our day-to-day within the business world. And while we're maybe familiar with the regulations, maybe not all of us are as familiar with the masterminds behind these regulations, which is why I'm so excited for today's guest, Catherine Atkin, who is joining us on the Resilience Report. So welcome, Catherine.
Oh, Lauren, great to be here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And that's probably a little too kind of an introduction. It was really a group effort. Excited to talk about what we've been up to in California.
Well, to fully level set, I always like to assume that not everybody is as comfortable with the vocabulary. So this might seem like a really basic question. But when we talk about greenhouse gas reporting, can you help share what we mean by that so that it just sets the tone for the rest of the conversation?
Sure. Greenhouse gas reporting is really our way to understand what's happening with regards to the GHG emissions associated with corporations and both their own production, but also what happens in their supply chains, both upstream and downstream. So really for all of us to be smart about, taking climate action, informing decarbonization, we need the data. I mean, that's how it starts, right? We don't have all the resources in the world. We need to do things in a smart way. And so a GHG emissions profile is really kind of the beginning, the foundation of really smart climate planning on behalf of companies. But as we're also seeing, we've got, investors and capital markets are increasingly wanting to understand what's happening in their portfolios or in their prospective portfolio companies. And then we've got consumers wanting this data too. So it's really just that baseline of like what's happening in a company.
To that end, you are co-founder and director of Carbon Accountable, where you are able to bring both the legal and technical lens of digging into this data for companies. Can you share a little bit more about that work?
Yeah, Carbon Accountable was launched really just about 4 years ago as kind of the vehicle for the California disclosure policy. And what we were seeing out there, and as I did work actually at the Stanford Law School, I have a policy institute looking at carbon data. I'm an attorney by training. And what we were starting to see in the space is that we weren't really getting the kind of catalyzation of the climate economy. We weren't moving and creating the markets that are required. And so in looking at kind of where the breakdown is, like why aren't we getting there? Because we know we need to do that. There is no time to not move towards radical decarbonization and making the green economy a win. The fact that we just didn't have this baseline data was a big gap. And so, while voluntary emissions reporting had its time, it was really important early on when we were trying to figure out, like, how do you do a GHG emissions profile? Companies were learning like what it takes to build the capacity internally. The reality was that we're just not getting there with this kind of incomplete data. We were getting sort of a Swiss cheese. Some companies were doing some parts of a scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions GHG profile. Some would be doing others. And so there was really no way for us to build the confidence in the market to drive, climate tech and decarbonization. So Carbon Accountable's goal was to look at what we've done in California and take a page out of our, legacy of leadership and saying, well, California can put down a marker that can then have not only effects in the state, but in the country and globally. And so that led to the creation of the bill that is now SB 253 enshrined into law, which is the first state-based, but also a U.S. requirement for GHG disclosure for any company doing business in California.
I would love to dig in a little bit deeper on the state bill. So I know that Carbon Accountable served really as the architect and the advisor, again, on the legal and the technical implications of the bill. Maybe just for those like myself who are quite far away from putting that kind of project into place, what does that even look like from that architecture and implementation standpoint?
I'd like to say, most things and most policies that are created are really built on whatever has happened before it that can be kind of repurposed for the particular challenge that you're trying to address as a policy matter. So, in California, we also did benefit, as I mentioned, from the fact that we did have voluntary disclosure regimes internationally, right? And so we do have a robust kind of body of knowledge. And I will also say, the fact that we have a globally recognized standard for GHG accounting and reporting, it's called the GHG protocol. We weren't starting from scratch, right? That standard is what you are seeing in all of the reporting regimes internationally. And, we can talk a little bit more about what else has been going on, because California is joining other jurisdictions that are putting these mandatory reporting requirements in place. So, you look for a standard. That's always like the foundation of the policy. Like, what are you asking people to do? We have the GHG protocol. We don't need California to have its own, flavor of reporting ice cream. So we've got the standard. And then the question is, well, what do we ask? Who reports? And that's where we said, if you do business in California, and we also decided that it should not just be public companies, but also private. We see that if you're a publicly traded company and you're doing this, we want to level the playing field. And we also know that in the United States, for instance, for billion-dollar revenue corporations, which is the cut for this bill, for every one publicly traded company, there are 2 privately held companies. So if we don't start getting them lined up to be taking, being smart about what they're doing, we're not going to be addressing the climate challenge that we're facing. So those were sort of the elements of kind of the foundation for the policy. And then, we went to Sacramento. I mean, that's kind of like how a bill becomes a law. And that's the wonderful thing about a democracy, right? Is that you can roll up your sleeves. And, I've had experience in other areas, developing legal frameworks and proposals. So went to Sacramento. And Senator Scott Wiener is one of those kind of lions of the Senate in California. We have so many great legislators, but he was one of those, you're looking for somebody who, it's a relatively new topic for policymakers, right? Like GHG emissions, corporations, that this is new stuff. So finding somebody who was really going to get it and be able to articulate the imperative for it. And frankly, also just to say, this was not an easy bill to get passed. There was vociferous a business lobby opposition. I mean, we had great leading companies that came out and made all the difference, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Salesforce. But the main business lobby was, very opposed and spent a lot of, tens of millions of dollars to lobby against the both, this bill. And there was two bills in California. SB 253 was GHG emissions disclosure, which is what I was really most connected to. But we also had a companion bill, SB 261, which is a climate risk disclosure bill. So, the getting a legislator that can really withstand that kind of business opposition is important. And that's where California has that great legacy of legislators saying, we've got to move things forward. So that's a little bit of how it went. And, there was so many twists and turns. And I think the ESG and sustainability space is really moving quickly. And so we really benefited from a lot of what we're seeing in terms of just companies getting on board, other jurisdictions passing laws. So, we benefited from those tailwinds.
And to repeat the term that you used, that legacy of leadership in California is certainly visible. And I think for most of us in the space who are interacting with California, we recognize how important of a body it is in the sense that it is actually the world's fifth largest economy, which always blows my mind. But that, I'm sure, is certainly what struck such a chord, positive and negative, from those different businesses, because it is such a strong economy. It has such an impact on businesses around the world. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit more? Because sometimes when you think of a state bill, you think it's just within the state, but it has such a global reach.
When you think about making a difference on the environment, I mean, these disclosure bills are just one in a series of incredible sort of nation and globally leading environmental and climate policies that have been put in place in California. So it is a proud legacy. I mean, we've had, early on the toxics movement, you move to focus more on climate and the environment. That led to the cap and trade program in California, the low carbon fuel standard. These are all incredibly important components of kind of our global infrastructure for addressing climate. And they have gone on to be sort of the, other jurisdictions, other countries have, taken, pages out of the playbook. So, that is something that makes a huge difference in thinking. I mean, California thinks about itself and well, if something's hard, maybe California should do it, right? Because we have that legacy. We have a legislature that gets elected based on leadership like this. So I think that, and really just to recognize too, California is experiencing the ravages of climate change, right? The forest fires, the flooding. And so I think, if you're really going to be a public official, if you're going to lead for the benefit of Californians, GHG emissions don't stop at the border of California. You can't just clean up your own backyard and protect the citizens and the environment in California. You have to, address the fact that we have to decrease global emissions if we want to protect ourselves at any point on the globe. So we're in this together. And I think that's the approach that we took in California. And, we was for lots of things kind of just lined up. I'd have to say, I've been part of a lot of important or what I thought were worthy causes. They don't always come to fruition. And the fact that this happened was really a testament to, I think, a smart policy, a great author. I also think the fact that the EU and, really put a marker down with the CSRD. I mean, there were already then companies that were going to have to be reporting. These things happened during the course of this campaign. And then I also want to just recognize that companies, I think there was really an inflection point where large corporations and leaders leading climate forward companies realized that it's not enough for them just to be good actors for their own company, that they have to be stewards of the sector. And I think that was really important because you started to see a pushback against business lobbies that were opposing this bill, but others, and saying, you know what, it's not okay. You don't speak for us. And we have to sort of step out. So I really think that was a tremendous benefit. I'm seeing that in other policies now. So that's really great.
And with that company lens, I know a lot of our listeners tend to be really concerned about greenwashing. And I know that that is such a driving force behind the need for transparency and the need for reporting. So, can you share how you've seen this translate with the implementation of this bill and how we're trying to tackle greenwashing, especially as it pertains to greenhouse gas emissions in that case?
It's so important to understand too, one of our real kind of goals with this bill was not only to give companies the data they need, the insights they need to understand where they can take a scarce dollar and move it to decarbonize most with the greatest impact, but also and inform those financial markets. But as you're saying, really because we are at risk of losing the confidence of the public. And that is something that is going to have devastating impacts on our kind of political will, because we have a lot more that needs to happen. And we have to have the public confident that we are actually doing what we're saying. So that the greenwashing is just something that we absolutely had to clean up. And we've seen that also with the carbon markets and carbon credits. We're really at all levels when the data isn't verifiable, when there isn't accountability, when we don't have assurance levels on the data, then we are really creating this sort of very soft ground for building a strong economy. Yeah, so important. And for California, the consumer piece, that was really important to us. Oftentimes, this conversation is about investors, and we think that's tremendously important, but we also really recognize that consumers, need this data as well.
And I would love to go back at the top, you're talking about the shift from voluntary to mandatory reporting. And then there's certainly a shift over in terms of the regulations from maybe what was more of a carrot approach to a stick approach with regulations. Do you feel like one is maybe better or needed at this point in time, or can they be complementary? What have you seen with your deep experience in this space?
I mean, it's both and. I mean, we absolutely need both the carrots and the sticks. And I think, there's not that much controversy about the carrot, right? I mean, I think that regardless of kind of jurisdiction or political affiliation, like we know, there's no doubt that we need finance and supports. I mean, you cannot displace, these legacy markets without investing in the new and next thing until it can stand on its own without the need for a green premium. And so we've obviously seen that with solar, and we need to recognize that we have to invest in our climate tech solutions. But I do think that for me, the compliance markets are also critical. And I think we saw that with voluntary reporting, you're just not going to get companies to do that kind of disclosure that then kind of moves them on a path for change. And unless that's a requirement. And I think in some ways, the way I look at it, it's not like these are entities that don't want to do the right thing where you have to make them do the right thing. I think what we're trying to do is say, we're taking this, you don't have to go into the C-suite and convince them that this is important and that there'll be long-term economic benefits. You get to go in and say, you know what? It's not really a conversation about whether we should or when we should do it. We have to do it. So I also loved seeing CSOs, right? Chief Sustainability Officers, on the one hand, that if these mandatory requirements put more pressure on the company, that's not easy. I understand that. At the same time, it gives the sustainability teams in companies the opportunity to be at the table in a much bigger way and to provide leadership. And so I see this, kind of the compliance requirements as a complement to the carrots. And I think, we're going to see like the EU, compared to the EU, what we just did in California is, I'm super proud of it, but it's kind of like undergrad. If you go to the CSRD, it's like a postdoc. There's like so much it's asking for, and that's super exciting. I think we have to understand the United States, like we have a different political environment. And so it's like we have to just figure out, it's kind of like we're all in this big global team together. What can everybody do? Where can they push the envelope? Where can they add some sugar as well? And so I think that's the way I look at it.
And I know a number of us working in this space were pretty disheartened with the SEC starting and stopping this past year. And we're definitely looking to California, to Europe to bridge the gap in the interim. But do you think there's any learning for us in the sustainability space from the SEC situation, like anything that we can apply to the way we're approaching the problem?
I think the short answer is that I think we were just victims of like larger forces that we just don't have the political power, to overcome at this point. So the SEC rule, I think, we know that even as it was being drafted and finalized, there was tremendous business, lobby opposition, and that's why we unfortunately, saw Scope 3 drop out, not only the opposition, but the threat of legal challenge. And I do think the SEC has, because there is a question of the delegation of authority to the agency, which we don't have in California because the legislators passed the law themselves. There were some differences, but I would just say that, while I think we have to think about how we position these issues, and certainly there's a conversation about how to talk about ESG, how to make this a win-win across the aisle. That isn't the reason the SEC rule is not going to see the light of day, right? It's really because there are real interests that are opposed to it. And we obviously have an incoming administration and a pick for the SEC chair who's already said and had said before, this is like, we should not be doing this kind of thing.
Mm.
So yeah, I think we just have to, be mindful of the broader political environment. We got to do a couple things at one time, walk and chew gum. But, I think it's unfortunate, but I also realize that, it just means that states have to pick up the slack. So it's kind of also been gratifying to be, an opportunity to give an example of that, right? Which before people were really thinking about states as an area of focus, kind of demonstrating there are real opportunities to make a difference. And so we're going to need to see a lot more of this kind of activity.
Recently, you were at COP and you shared that you felt like politics and policies are both headwinds and tailwinds for all of us in this space. Can you share a little bit more? It sounds like you were just saying we might be seeing some at the state level, some at the federal level, but I would love to hear more, especially on such a global stage.
Yeah. I mean, going to COP, the good news is you can not be at COP and read all the same like bulletins. So, I mean, there is a way in which like we're all experts and not experts on what happened at COP. But I would say this, I do feel like sometimes, we expect a COP to deliver things that if we actually looked at what the conditions are going into COP, we shouldn't be surprised at the lack of progress, right? So COP is a reflection of the larger environment. It doesn't create it. And so I think that, we're seeing that the hard work to line up kind of from the grassroots to the private sector to government to have the political will to increase ambition is a very kind of like a step forward, maybe a step back, a couple steps forward. We keep making progress, but as we all know, not at the pace that we feel like we need to. So that was more, what I felt about COP is that we really need to, recognize that we do need consumers to be educated and active, because in those countries that need to move on climate, I mean, they have to feel that there's a political push for that. Mm-hmm. And so, I certainly when it comes to I would say, the EU is obviously, as I said, doing a lot. And it's kind of amazing to me how much their policies are having this ripple effect globally. So I would say on the good news side, when there are jurisdictions and that take a stand and then drive markets, it is affecting, not just them, but the broader market. For instance, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, I am seeing that that is going to have a tremendous effect, right? When the EU says we're going to level the playing field, we're asking more of our own companies, but we're going to level the playing field. And that means that other countries are going to have to, those supplier nations are going to adjust and have to adjust to stay in business. I saw a lot of conversation about, that other countries are already figuring that they have to support their economies to respond to those requests for scope 3 data, to make sure that they're globally competitive in the markets that are being created. So I also saw a lot of kind of good news.
Well, I think all of us will take whatever good news you can share coming out of that. And you did mention it earlier, this idea of, ESG is certainly polarized and absolutely politicized at the moment. And you were talking about, is there this possibility to frame solutions in a way that reaches across the aisle? Do you feel like that is actually possible, or do you feel like we've gotten so far apart that we're almost just not even hearing each other at this point?
I'm sort of two minds on this. I don't think we should get too distracted with being worried that we're, we have to redo the whole, never say the word ESG again, or, at the same time, I done a lot of work in politics and policy over time. And, we do need to be smart about how we make our arguments. And I think it's regardless of what you call it, the reality is that there are challenges and opportunities that the corporate sector is going to face, right? We are seeing the effects of climate change now, right? So climate risk is something that is absolutely part of the bottom line. So I think, we have an opportunity to say in the short term for your company to, be resilient, you need to have the data so that you can start to make smart decisions to ensure the kind of the long-term strength of your company. And I think that when it comes to kind of the opportunities for driving kind of the markets, I do think that regardless, to me, if the capital markets, finance doesn't talk about sustainability or doesn't say that's their fund is this thing, I think what we're seeing is that we're continuing to see a desire, especially from consumers, for these products. So to me, it's it doesn't really matter what you call them, but let's just say we know that there is a need to support companies to be successful in the future, to respond to consumers who want, a clean and sustainable future. And the market will be, needs to respond to that.
I do have to ask you too, because I feel like if I had done your work with the state bill, I would have just been okay, well, I'm done. I can retire now. They just have that legacy. But I have the feeling that with your commitment to the space, that you are probably working on a ton of projects and the follow-up of the projects. Are you working on anything in particular that you're really excited about and that you can share?
Yeah, a couple things. One is that, after going to COP, I had the chance to go visit North Macedonia and the Western Balkans. And one of the reasons I'm excited about working with those countries, and those are a set of countries that are seeking to accede into the European Union, right? So the thing is, they're being impacted by the regulatory environment right now. And what I feel like I want to be part of is I had the opportunity to create kind of the forcing function, our part, my little part, California's part, to then create that drive for global better GHG data, which will also drive the need to decarbonize. I also feel like, the large companies, I never had a problem asking them to put the money, invest the money that's required to get a hold of your GHG emissions data, right? That's at the same time, I am aware of the larger global economy and that there are a lot of countries that main economy are small and medium-sized enterprises. And it is really important that they not get left behind. When we talk about the kind of equity and whether it's the South and the North, I really do feel like when it comes to this, I am also passionate about democratizing access to these products. And so that's one of the projects I'm working on the Western Balkans is how do we create sort of open source solutions? And then also for those companies that are going to face financial hurdles to getting a grip. And I do think we have some great technology solutions that can help with that, but also helping governments put together the systems to support their economies to be successful in this kind of green transition. So that's one thing, I'm excited on working on as kind of a follow-on, thinking about disclosure. One thing we are going to be doing in California is advancing a bill to focus on the power of procurement, government procurement, and the opportunity we have as California to take that, to the same way we're the fifth largest economy, we have, huge, multi-billion dollar investments, in all kinds of goods and services. And so we think that in the same way that the state of California said, if you want to do business in our state, you need to share your GHG emissions information, climate risk information. We think the state has a chance to lead by requiring some major suppliers in California to do the same thing. And in this case, we're also kind of playing off of the great work that was happened in the White House at the federal level to do similar work, which we also think that may not see the light of day given the change in administration. So that's another area. And I think I'm excited about that because I think that's something states could do. So I'm also excited to do something where it can kind of be that's an easy, not easy, but that's something that I consider low-hanging fruit that could drive, important activity at the state level. So there's a couple of things I'm interested in.
So it doesn't sound like 2025 is going to be any less busy for you then.
I mean, I don't know about you, Lauren. I mean, I see how much you do. And I feel so fortunate to be able to do this work at this time. And, and there's so much to do and so much to learn. I feel like, I get to do this thing every day. Yeah. So it's terrific. And yeah, so I'm excited to do that and excited to work with people that, I see how, what are the things that I think we all have to think this way. What's our special sauce? Like, we don't do it all, right? Like, nobody's thing is the answer. Like, no climate tech solution is going to do the whole thing, or no policy is going to make it happen. I mean, a lot of this is ecosystems and kind of lining up things to unlock impact. And so that's the kind of thing I'm really interested in being part of.
Have you had this interest as far back as you can remember, or was there a catalyst moment where you thought, oh, I really want to dedicate at least part of my career to this space?
I mean, what the other fun part about this is I'm a latecomer to this space. I mean, there's a lot of people that have been doing this work in climate, kind of broader ESG for a long time, for decades, when nobody, when it was not the cool kid thing to do. And I have so much respect for that. I actually was in that kind of ed tech space. As I said, I'm an attorney, and I did a lot of other things. And then as I was thinking about what do I want to sink my teeth into? What for me, where could I bring what I've done to, into a place where I would hope I could have some impact and add to the collective, efforts. And so climate is one of them. And so, yeah, I mean, this is not something I was doing as a young attorney. And it's great to see young people really excited to have these jobs and to see so many more jobs and to see every job's going to be a climate kind of job. So yeah, that's my story.
And do you feel like even if it's, let's say, was that 5-10 years ago or so?
Just about, it's really in the last 5-6 years that I've really kind of moved into this space and got really focused.
And do you think if you could go back those 5 or 6 years and share something about sustainability and the work, what it was going to be like over the next few years, would you have any advice to Catherine 5 to 6 years ago?
I mean, I really wish I had gotten into this space earlier. I just think it's so important and so interesting and full of people that are very generous. That is another part I love about this space, is that everybody knows the job is so big, and we need the smartest people from every walk of life doing every kind of thing. So I find that, just so gratifying. So yeah, I wish I'd gotten started earlier at it. And, I would also just say, for me, regardless of where you are in your career, I also think just realizing that, I mean, there's a real opportunity to make a difference, and, just be bold, decide what you're good at, and then know that there's something for you to offer, and then kind of push yourself a little farther than, you might feel why am I the person to do that? I mean, I think we need a lot more people who are like, well, why not me? Right. And I think that is a critical part of this. It's, we need a lot more people that are just like, not just kind of, we're just going to do it. And if we're not successful, we'll be adding to the collective will for it to happen the next time.
Well, it sounds like that's probably a big part of your motivation, but do you have any tools or tricks that you keep in your own toolbox to be able to keep on coming back and recommitting to the work? Because to your point with the state bill, it got challenged and challenged and challenged, and it wasn't just easy. What is it that you are able to lean on in those moments to be able to keep on coming back to the work?
I think for me, I realize that most things, and we know this in life, right? The things that are the most worthwhile are always difficult. I mean, if they're not difficult, they're not that big a deal. And so I think that when you hit a headwind, to not be like, oh, maybe this is the wrong thing, but to say like, oh, I'm expecting this. Like I'm trying to do something that's, a little bit outside of my comfort zone. I'm maybe stepping on some toes, right? And to have a collaborative spirit, but to also really just be okay with like, I think in this space, I think we all have to feel uncomfortable. That is, we're in a situation we have to change. So everybody has to be in a change management stance. So it's like, that's okay. And we just need to work together to do it. So that would be I would say that's the work, the ethos.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your work, everything that's coming up. I'm so excited to follow along. We do like to end every episode with the same question, however, which is, what do you think it will take for businesses and leaders to be resilient going forward?
I think that running a business is always challenging, right? And so, I recognize that companies have a lot on their plates. I think that what it's going to take to be a successful business going forward is to recognize that the climate is changing. Like just to be successful in managing that is going to require like real focus and attention. And that means, getting smart, investing in the people that you need to, be those sort of stewards for you as you go on that path to both, be a robust business, but also be a sustainable business. I also think that recognizing that the consumers really want to see these, they want to see corporate leadership. I think that's only going to increase. I mean, we know we're seeing generally in society, the populace is, kind of has a jaundiced eye to business. They're not sure about what their motivations are. And I think, we can decry that or, say it's not totally fair. But the reality is that companies are much more accountable on all levels. So I think just kind of recognizing that company has a great opportunity to really get ahead of things and to be seen as a leader by showing that they care about what's happening currently for the people that they serve, but also how do we protect for the future.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine. This is even more than I was expecting. So thank you so much for today's conversation.
Thank you, Lauren. Really appreciate all the work you're doing. It's so important to create these dialogues and, all learn from each other. So thank you.
I hope that you've enjoyed this week's edition of the Resilience Report. If you would like to hear and see more, be sure to check out @The Resilience Report on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until we connect again, remember, even on the darkest of days, we all have the opportunity to be a lighthouse for others as we collectively pursue better, more resilient business.